Doug, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. You've had an amazing career, which we'll dive into, but what makes it so amazing is the impact you've had not only on the businesses you've led, but on business leadership in general. What are some of the core tenets of your leadership philosophy?
Well, leaders need followers, and followers are earned. They're not given to you de facto. And so I believe as a leader, one needs to be wildly connected to the people that work for and with you. And the more you evidence a commitment to them, the more they bring a commitment to the enterprise, to the work. And so it's all about the people that work for and with you. It's not about you. It's never about you. And as soon as you can move into that mindset where it's about our community, our enterprise, and serve that enterprise and community with altruism, you gain power and you gain influence. People will listen and people will follow. So the fundamental belief I have is it's all about the people. Another fundamental belief I have is that every one of us has our own leadership story, and they're all different. No two people lead the same way. And, I get a kick out of all these leadership books, and I've read probably in my last 40 years, thousands of them. And you can lead like this, you can lead like that, you do this, do that. And all of those may have worked for the people that wrote the book, but they wouldn't work for you or me because they're not informed by our experience, by our aspirations, by our capacity to lead. They're all about somebody else. And so the latest book I've done, The Blueprint, which I'm sure we'll get into, it's all about helping people find their own unique leadership DNA and bring that to the fore. A lot's been written in leadership over the last decade or so about authentic leadership. And you can't be authentic if you're trying to lead like somebody else. Mm. You have to lead like only you can. And you have to have an understanding of what that looks like and what that feels like. So leadership is unique to you, and finding your way is the challenge that leaders today have, because it's a challenging journey. So those are the two thoughts. No one can lead like you, and it's all about the people and the community you're serving. It's not about you.
I love that. I think it's such a important message that just because of your job title, it doesn't mean you're a leader. It's not a
far
right
from it.
given by job title. It's a privilege by the way that you're acting, and a relationship that you've built with people and trust you've built where they want to follow you.
Well, I mean, given, what you want is you want people to leverage discretionary effort in service to your community. I don't care if you're a not-for-profit, a public school system, or whatever. When they have the time to leverage discretionary effort outside the job role, you want them leaning into serving that community with distinction. And in my experience, they're not going to do that unless they want to, and unless they've been invited in, and unless they feel wildly supported by you. It just isn't going to happen. It's not practical.
Totally. Now, I guess, when did you first realize this part of leadership, that employee engagement and really getting employees on board and bought in was a secret to success?
Well, it became pretty obvious early to me, but in the sense that you quickly realize when you're working in a large organization that your success is dependent on everybody else. It's not like you're just running your own little podcast and your success is dependent on, have you done your homework? Are you ready to do the interview? And I mean, at one point I was a aspiring touring tennis professional, very individual oriented sport. And I was at tennis, and I taught tennis to pay my way through school. And there I had complete control over that. If I was prepared and I did it, I could manage that one-on-one relationship. But then I went into the world of work, and I'm surrounded by people that we have to play nice in order to get the job done. And I mean, you have to be naive to think that you can control all that. And so very early in the world of work, I discovered that my success was tied to my ability to work with other people. And I didn't have to be perfect at it, but I just had to be better than the other guy. And the good news is the other guy was usually not very good. So I could make it work. I think this, I mean, it's just a reality of the world of work that you have to have a special, you have to forge a special connection with your community if you want to get things done in a special, distinctive way. You need a special, distinctive connection to get things done in a special, distinctive way. I don't know. It's like 2 + 2 = 4. But I'm amazed at the people that miss the boat. I'm absolutely astounded. And that's why I've leaned into focusing on leadership so much and trying to champion it. Most of the people that write about leadership have never done it. I love my academic friends. I mean, I love them, but they couldn't lead 10 people. There's just no way. And they much less do it 24/7 for 40 years, you know. And so what I bring to this conversation is a studied practitioner's point of view about what we call at Conant leadership that works. Why? Because we've worked it, and I've worked it for a long time.
You know, one of the things you said I want to just emphasize again, which is leading in the way that only you can lead. And I think one of the reasons why so many leaders do miss the boat is that they're trying to lead in the way that they think a leader is supposed to be. And when you're trying to be something that's not you, I think a side effect of that, and I'm curious if you agree with this, but it just came into my mind, is you start getting rid of the parts of you that are human, that are you, that are essential to how you operate in the world. And so it isn't as, I guess it isn't as authentic, to go back to that word.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, you know, it's funny. I talked to a college president today, and he's struggling with exactly this dilemma. And as stress levels go up, as you get higher in organizations, you're responsible for more things and more people, and stress levels go up. And as stress levels go up, anxiety goes up, and people become more guarded and more self-protective. And I mean, it's a natural phenomenon. So yeah, it's a real issue. You know, the operative notion here on that specific dimension is the notion of courage. And Maya Angelou has a great quote. She talks about courage as being the most important virtue of all virtues, because without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue consistently. And most leaders, I got to tell you, they haven't sufficiently developed the courage of their convictions. They really don't know where they stand on things. They're busy reacting to everything. And so it's hard to have the courage of your convictions if you don't know what your convictions are. And I would say most leaders don't know. And they haven't done the work to unearth, what do I really believe in? What do I want to stand for here? Who am I? Haven't done the work. And, you know, at anything you choose to excel at, you got to do the work. And if you want to lead, you got to do the work of becoming the best leader you can be. And sadly, most leaders have a plan for everything. I got to have my annual plan, my business plan, my financial plan, my marketing plan. But then you say to them, here's the most important thing you do is it's leading people. It's all about the people. What's your leadership plan? And they say, oh, I don't know. I just sort of react to what comes my way, and I do the best I can, and I have some experience. That's bullshit. It's not good enough. People are counting on you to lead them in an enlightened way. I talk about leadership as being sacred ground here. You have a profound impact on people. And it's like, and the best you can do is just react to what comes your way, and I'm doing the best I can. Bullshit, not good enough. You have an obligation to these people to lead them in an enlightened way. You have an obligation to them to know what your convictions are and to lead with those convictions. Sadly, that's work that most leaders haven't done, which is why I wrote the blueprint and why I continue to champion the notion of you got to get in touch with who you are before you can start leading anybody anywhere. Bill George pioneered the concept. It wasn't me in modern day concept when he wrote True North and Authentic Leadership about 10 to 20 years ago. And I'm just trying to take it to the next level. But, as things get more and more chaotic, leaders tend to be overwhelmed, and they're just reacting to who can deal with all the chaos. They're just reacting to what comes their way. And sadly, there's no evidence that works well, none. So what we try and do is champion the notion of get in touch with who you are and how you want to show up. And that's going to make it infinitely easier for you to lead with conviction.
That is such good advice and so important. And I loved how you tied it back to the notion of courage. And I think that that's such a strong tie because, as you were saying, when you are leading a bunch of people and you get stressed and your level of stress is up, you start protecting yourself, right? And when you're protecting yourself, that means you're not being vulnerable. That's the opposite of protecting. And courage requires an amount of vulnerability to come out and say, these are my convictions. And regardless of if our business is doing great or not doing great, this is what we stand by. And this is what we're going to, this is how we're going to behave within the organization.
Absolutely. Brene Brown and I are wildly in agreement on this. All of her work on vulnerability, and my work they just nest with each other naturally. Ultimately, you want that discretionary effort and that unique sense of commitment from the people with whom you work. And in other words, you want them to be vulnerable to your influence. If you want them to be vulnerable to your influence, you need to be vulnerable to them. Mm-hmm. I just don't, it just doesn't make sense that you could do it any other way in the thick of thin things with all the chaos going on around you. They need to see the full you, not just the guarded you. And by the way, I don't mean to suggest that leaders are consciously being self-protective. I think they're naturally being emotionally self-protected. Because it can be overwhelming, and so they basically, I think they just sort of partially shut down. I don't think, I work with thousands of leaders now, and I just I think they have good intentions. They just don't have the equipment to rise to the challenge.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, it's the doing the work of understanding what's important to you and how to align with that, which does take a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, it does, but it's actually not that hard because you've just never done it and you don't know how to do it. I remember 1,000 years ago, I had a chance to work with Stephen Covey pretty extensively in Utah. And I worked on my personal mission statement and, sort of the way I wanted to lead my life, one page. I had a rough draft of it in a week after some reflection and study and things. And I still carry it with me. and I've lived into it. And that was probably 30 years ago. And so, it's not that heavy a lift. You just have to do it. And everybody says, I don't have time. Well, uh, you have to make time. Otherwise, you're
Mm,
going to be reacting for the rest of your life. And believe me, that's not the way to do it.
totally. And that's incredible that you still have that statement. And it's been
Yeah.
guiding you this whole time. That's incredible.
Yeah. Well, I carry it with me in my briefcase along with a whole bunch of stuff that reminds me of what matters most, because I
Mm,
think leaders today need to be that you need to have practices that bring this stuff to life, so it's not just a thought in your subconscious. And I carry things with me that remind me what matters most to me, and
mm.
how I want to show up. And I as a I think all leaders need to find practices that remind them, that they carry with them physically, emotionally, and mentally, that remind them of what matters most.
I love that. Now, I'd love to dive in a bit to your history. So, you were president of the Nabisco Foods Company from 1991 to 98. Um, from what I've read, it sounds like your time at Nabisco helped to develop your leadership style. Can you please share a little bit about the challenges you overcame at Nabisco by cultivating an employee focused culture while there?
Sure. Uh, I had been uh, fired from a job years earlier that that challenged me to rethink how I showed up as a leader. Ultimately, I was recruited into RJR Nabisco right after an episode where they became the world's largest LBO, world's largest leverage buyout by investment banking firm KKR. A movie was made about it. It was incredibly traumatic for the employees. And I was recruited in to run a small division. Ultimately, the last 5 years I was there, I ran the Nabisco Foods Company. And when I got there, I was astounded at the employee morale. They were all devastated. Everybody knew somebody that had been let go.
Mm,
Either they were sitting to the left of them or the right of them. They had been let go, and it hadn't been pretty. And there were a ton of stories about how executives had parachuted out with these lucrative buyout packages. And the employees felt as if they were left holding the bag. They were devastated. And then we were being run by a well intentioned organization, KKR, but they wanted to pay down the debt and get out of the investment as quickly as they could. And so there's just a lot of pressure on employees, and employees didn't believe anybody cared, uh, which at the time wasn't all wrong. And so as I got there, I was thinking, well, how are we going to get anything done here if we don't create this sense of community I talked about?
mm,
So when I was early on there, they moved me into a very senior role in marketing before I became president. And uh, I, uh, I subscribe to, you can't manage things you can't measure, typical business person. And so I said, let's measure what I would call employee engagement today. I did a culture survey, and it was from the Center for Values Research, CVR, and we interviewed all our folks. And I remember the guy, the crusty old veteran researcher, who said, Doug, uh, this is horrible. These results are the worst results I've ever seen. I also heard that when I went to Campbell. And he compared them to swamp water. He said, the only way I can describe this is swamp water. And
wow.
you've got a heavy lift ahead of you. So we developed a plan, a multi-pronged plan to get people engaged in the process. I wasn't going to solve it. Together we were going to solve it. And the next year we went through the process, and he said, man, you've made great progress. You've gone from swamp water to Perrier. And then the next year, we kept working this process. The next year, he said, "This is unbelievable. You've gone from swamp water to Perrier to champagne." And in 2 years, we went from having a horrible situation to having a world-class situation. And by the way, we had the best year in the history of Nabisco the year I was doing that with that group.
Wow.
And in the middle of a leverage buyout mess. And so I mean, you could just see that the more people were engaged, the better we did. And now you have to have the right tools at your disposal. You have to have the right brands, the right business proposition, right strategy. But ultimately, you need the people to bring it to life. And we did. And so that was the story there. And then we went on. I took that to the Nabisco Foods Company. I did that for 5 years. And we had world-class engagement. And during those 5 years, we were the best performing food company in the United States. And we had best financially performing, best market share performing, and best culture performance of any food company in the United States
Wow.
in a real messed up environment, which is what ultimately led me to Campbell Soup Company. And my contribution there with a lot of other people, because it wasn't about me, it was about them. Our performance there created opportunities for many of us to go on and do other things. In my case, that's when I became CEO of Campbell Soup Company. So, you know, I've been in some just horrible situations. We'll probably talk about Campbell next. And I got to tell you, if we could do it in those situations, there's just any leader ought to be able to lift the profile of their group if they actively and earnestly engage in leading in an enlightened way with great authenticity and focusing on creating a high engagement culture. That's my
Wow.
story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, you have some pretty solid proof points for your story.
I do.
Um, as you look at Nabisco, I mean, that type of employee engagement turnaround in just 3 years, and even in just the first year, is really impressive. And I'm curious, are there just a few things that you found worked really well? And I say that knowing that every organization is different and every leader is different. But I'm curious if there's a couple of things that come to mind.
Well, there's some principles. If you want them to care about your enterprise, you need to show that you care about them. And basically, associates want, I'm going to really simplify here, they
Mm.
want 4 things. Stephen Covey organized it for me in a way I could remember it. It's basically Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But at the base of the pyramid, they want good living conditions for their work, materials and equipment. I need to do my job. I want to know what my job is with clarity. At the next level of the pyramid is love. They want to be valued, and they want to know that you have their back. And at the next level of the pyramid, they want to have opportunities to learn and to grow. And at the peak of the pyramid, they want to have an opportunity to leave a legacy of contribution that transcends the ordinary, because they're spending more of their working hours doing this than anything else. They want it to be special. So this notion of living, loving, learning, and leaving a legacy, 4 L's, is sort of, those are the areas you have to focus on to create high engagement. And all of this, I think the most important thing, the base things you got to be clear about. They have to have the equipment to do the job, and they have to know what's expected. But the most important thing is the loving. And that's where most organizations fall flat, because it requires vulnerability and commitment and emotional connection, which is not natural for many leaders. And they have to know you're paying attention and you care about them. And so, most companies are great critical thinking machines. They find what's going wrong and they focus on fixing it. Even in the most broken companies, I've seen 8 out of 10 things are being done right, but nobody talks about what's being done right. If I raised my kids just focusing on what was wrong all the time,
Mm.
I'd have some pretty screwed up kids. But, we also celebrated things they did well. And so we started celebrating the things that were going right at Nabisco, not just finding the things that were going wrong. And by the way, that reinforced the standard that said, here's what right looks like. And so recognizing people for contributions of significance to the enterprise, I used to send out notes all the time celebrating things, and we had all kinds of celebrations. That's part of it. And then being sensitive to, we would survey, when we surveyed the group with the Center for Values Research, we shared the results with them and said, how can we make this better? We involved them in the process. And they said, well, we could do more of this, this, and this. And well, sure, let's go. And we'd like a little training. Maybe we could do some 7 Habits work, some of that Covey work. Could we do that? Sure. Oh, but we don't have a budget for it. I'll find the money. It's rounding error. We'll find the money. So we engage the community and have them help define what success would look like. We followed through on it. And I'm telling you, you got to be a dog on a bone with this. Every day, you have to be paying it forward and showing up in a way that's consistent with what you've said. And then ultimately, you got to be making it special somehow. We had to, we sort of had goals of really becoming a distinctive force in the food industry that people could buy into. We had been through the world's largest LBO, and we wanted to come out of it demonstrating that we could do all this and then some, despite the difficult circumstances. And by the way, all this engagement stuff I just talked about doesn't cost a penny. I mean, very little. It's rounding error in a budget. Mm-hmm. It's just showing you care and then demonstrating it 24/7. So that was the framework we used. That was the approach we took. And as the culture started to improve, business improved quickly, and ultimately we ended up shooting the lights out. Peter Drucker has a quote: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," and that is so true. You get a high performance culture, and it's amazing what you can accomplish. And the other piece of this is it's all relative. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be better than the other guy. And I got news for you: all these other guys, they're struggling too. It's hard. You just got to be a little bit better, and you've got to be committed to getting better every day. And that's something that I think any organization can focus on.
Mm. Thank you for that explanation. And as you're talking about the elements that you focused on to create the culture, that sounds like a place that anyone would want to work.
Oh, yeah.
You're celebrating the wins, you're showing what good looks like, you're giving opportunities for growth to make an impact. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to be there? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to talk, just going to transition. Campbell Soup Company. We were the poorest performing food company large food company in the world. Okay. Mm-hmm. We were headquartered in the poorest, most dangerous city in the United States, Camden, New Jersey. 70 murders a year in a city of 75,000 people. We were bankrupt, and we had 4 years of horrible performance. We had the worst employee engagement when we measured it of any company in the Fortune 500, anyone. And you'd say, well, how are you going to get anybody to come to work there? We got everybody and then some we needed, because we followed a similar model. We created a high engagement culture, and it was like bees to honey. And we made dramatic changes, but we committed to creating a high engagement culture, and we attracted top-notch talent. I think we're just measuring it now. I want to say 49 of the people that came to work as part of that group have now gone on as CEOs. 49. Wow.
Wow.
And we replaced 300 of the top 350, another story, in the first 3 years. We promoted 150 from within, and we hired another 150 from outside, best and brightest in the food industry, to come work in Camden, New Jersey. Uh, and we were able to do it because we created a very special culture. And ultimately, we outperformed everybody in the next 7 years. And we're talking about a canned soup company that was selling the same product we'd been selling 100 years earlier. And we were being compared to a buggy whip by leading industry analysts. We were an old economy canned soup company. Who in the world would want to go to work there? Well, I got news for you. A lot of people. And boy, what fun we had with all the doubting Thomases and the doubting
Mm.
Thomasinas. We were able to strut our stuff. It was very special.
I love your experience at Campbell's and what you were able to do. There is something that I've read you say quite a bit, which we've touched on in various forms during this conversation. To win in the marketplace, you must first win in the workplace. And I think both your time at Campbell's and Nabisco are such good examples of it. So, to share some stats, while you were leading Campbell's, as you said, employee engagement went from being the worst in the Fortune 500 to the best. And from looking at 2001 to 2009, performance followed. So during that same period, total return on Campbell stock, assuming reinvested dividends, was more than 30%, whereas the S&P 500 was negative 10. So that's such a good example, really illustrating that as you turned that culture around, the marketplace performance went right along hand with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the food industry is a tough industry. It's not like technology and you hit on something and you just ride with it. The food industry grows at 2% a year, and it's using a football analogy. It's a sort of a 3 yards and a cloud of dust. You're grinding it out every year. It's not a high growth industry, and we're selling old economy food
Mm.
uh, that was arguably not on trend. So, and headquartered in the poorest, most dangerous city in the United States. If we could do it, anybody could do it. We also went the top 350. We had what we called an engagement ratio, which was what Gallup used to measure it at the time, of 2 to 1. We had for our top 350 leaders, two people engaged for every one person who was not engaged. Okay, which was horrible. Which you basically say a third of your workforce is looking for a job, and 2/3 of it is doing all the work. Uh, when I retired, the numbers, and this was 7 years after we'd made all the changes. 7 years after all that, our engagement ratio for the top 350 was 77 to 1,
Wow.
which Gallup had never seen before. So that meant like 4 people out of the top 350 were not engaged, maybe 5. Didn't matter. It was irrelevant. We had people that all over the world, and we were headquartered in 38 countries, all over the world. People had the eye of the tiger, and they were going to make a difference. And it was there was a spring in the step of the culture that you just was unmistakable. And so and a joy to work, a joy to work in, a joy to go to work. And by the way, it was still tough. It was incredibly tough. We had tough quarters. We had all kinds of, I mean, it was heavy. It was a heavy lift, but in the final analysis, anybody who was there during that period of time, I believe, would say they were there. They were at a special place at a special time.
That's incredible. And towards the end of your stewardship at Campbell's, the company was awarded a Catalyst Award in part for its winning in the workplace, winning in the marketplace, winning with women initiative. Tell me a little bit about the initiative and how you saw that supporting both the company culture and the company's profits.
Well, let's go back to at Campbell. When we did our early Gallup survey work, we found, basically we were an old economy company with old economy products with an old economy workforce. And we had white men working for older white men running the company. And women and people of color were not well represented. We learned that year one. And we actually had Catalyst come in and do an assessment for us of how are we doing with women in year one. And they came back and said, not very well. In fact, you're horrible. So we embarked on a program to muscle build our commitment to what we would now call DEI. And we were on a journey with it for a decade. Again, Stephen Covey had a great line. He reminded me of this several times. Doug, you can't talk your way out of something you behaved your way into. You've got to behave your way out of it. And the company had sort of behaved its way into a culture that was very white male dominant. And it was going to take time to work our way out of that and still deliver the business and keep it all going. So we had this Catalyst study, and then we developed a plan. We hired our first ever chief diversity officer, and Gwen Houston, who was fantastic. She went on to be chief diversity officer for Microsoft, but out in your neck of the woods. But she helped me create a plan that would start to open things up, open up conversations. And so we worked this plan in a very structured way, creating opportunities, but also in a way that invited everybody to be engaged in our journey. And 8 years later, we received the Catalyst Award for our progress. What was really gratifying about that was, and there's a video on my website where Nancy Reardon, my chief human resource officer, talks about this. We made headway with women, but at every level in the organization. I want to say there were like 10 different levels, grades, all the way up to senior executive. And we made headway in every level, all 10, for women. Ultimately, I was succeeded by a woman, first woman ever to run the company. And very, very proud of the progress we made there. But it was a heavy lift because the culture was not oriented that way when we started. That was probably one of the more challenging cultural turnarounds, one of the more challenging elements of our turnaround was getting our diversity mindset right, to really invite everyone in and to celebrate everyone's ability to contribute. We did it though. We made great progress, but they can still do better.
Being succeeded by a woman CEO says a lot for how much progress you made. I mean, that.
Well, she earned it. I mean, there was nothing. She was there. She was part of our turnaround. Her name was Denise Morrison. She earned the opportunity. It says a lot, but really, she was a logical candidate to have the opportunity, and she did a nice job.
I like that response.
I mean, it was sort of, ideally, I mean, if you do it right, it should be a no-brainer. She was qualified over and out.
Which seems like a no-brainer, and then you look at the boardrooms across America, and you
They're
don't
changing.
see that representation there yet.
They will change. Yeah. They will change. They are changing. They're changing profoundly now. It's sad that we have to have some of the platforms of these companies on fire before they start being responsive to that imperative. But
Mm-hmm.
I see boardrooms across the country changing, not just with women, but with different generations and with people of color and
Mm-hmm.
other persuasions. Uh, we're moving in a very healthy direction. Now, the frustrating thing for most people is it's not as fast as we would like. It's not as fast as internet information, right? Boom. You've got companies we were 25,000 people. I don't know how big your family was. I had 4 brothers and my 2 parents. There were 6 of us. We couldn't agree on anything. And somehow you're going to get 25,000 people over 38 countries to all be aligned and with all these different cultural cues and everything. Oh, now we get it. I mean, hello? Not practical. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to declare a commitment to it and then put one foot in the front of the other to make it a reality. If you want it to stick, as a CEO, you can have an edict and say, okay, here's where we're going. But, the day you leave, that's out the window because there's another CEO who's going to have another edict.
Mm-hmm.
You want to build these things in terms of the culture you're trying to create in a way that promises to be enduring. And there's an art to that. There's a science to it and an art.
And I think that as you've been talking about engaging the employees, talking about increasing representation of women and minorities in positions across the Campbell Soup Company, for example, one theme has come up in responses to a lot of these questions, which is taking in all of the voices of the organization. So asking the employees, how can we be better? What do we need to do? Which is the opposite of leader as dictator, which is saying this is what we're going to do. And that is the way you create an entire culture that can outlast one leader, which is really impressive.
That's true, but you do need, as a leader, you're not just following the people
Mm-hmm.
that work
Yeah.
for you. You have to arrive at a platform that you are going to, with fierce resolve, you are going to champion this platform, and but it ought to be informed by your whole community. But then once you lock
Mm-hmm.
in, you own it, and you're going to lead from in front, and you're going to champion it. So I don't want to make it sound like leaders are followers. There's a part in the process where you have to develop an informed point of view from all your stakeholders, and you need to invite them into the process. But then ultimately, you've got to make the call, and you've got to own it, and you've got to champion it. So this is not about just being soft and everybody in the company holding hands and singing kumbaya. There's some serious leadership required once you arrive at a place where you have the confidence that you can lead that whole community forward, not just elements of it. And also that you're going to do it in an enduring way. There are plenty of opportunities to episodically have your way, especially as CEO. But you have to be very careful with that. Most CEOs, you got 3 years. You got 3 years. The first year is the other guy's fault. I'm doing the best I can. It was messed up. The second year, well, we're starting to own it. We're starting to see progress. Third year, you own it. And if you're not making progress in the first 3 years, you're gone and somebody else is coming in. You have to sort of approach it that way. So you do have a sense of urgency. You do have to be prepared to assert yourself and lead with fierce resolve. And at the same time, you've got to be bringing a whole collection of people along with you. It's not easy. Nobody said this was easy, but CEOs are well compensated for doing this work. And but they need to earn it. So anyway, that's another conversation. One point I do want to make: uh, and I don't know that we're going to get to it, but we're going to get to it now, is I get into a lot of these, I'm talking about a higher order sense of purpose and trying to advance the community in an enduring way. And people somehow think, well, what do you want? Do you want purpose or profit? And that's the wrong question. You want both.
Mm-hmm.
When Jim Collins wrote the best-selling business book of all time, Good to Great, he talked about these companies that were the best performing companies in their sectors over 20 years financially. And then he looked at the cultures they all created. So enduring success stories. And he discovered that he talked about embracing the genius of the end. You want to have a higher order purpose and you want to do well. And the kind of things I'm talking about, they don't cost anything. There's no cost to it. Why am I'm not sacrificing profit. I'm enhancing my ability to make profit.
Mm-hmm.
People who start asking about, well, what matters more, purpose or profit? They both matter. You have investors; they have to get some profit. They don't want to get wild. Some investors may want to have wild returns. They should invest in something other than a canned soup company. But you have to have average to above average returns and do it in a way that's a model of consistency. And you can do that and still have a higher order purpose too. And there are literally hundreds of examples now of companies that are high on purpose and high on employee engagement
Mm-hmm.
and high on business performance. You can do it all. You should hold yourself to the standard of doing it all, but you have to do it in a holistic and measured way. But purpose or profit, wait, you're both right. And you ought to be doing it with both. Why wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't you want to have a higher purpose and better returns? So I get this conversation quite a lot. I couldn't help but insert it here.
Thank you. I agree with you 100%. And circling back to the Covey
mm-hmm.
higher order benefits that employees need, when you're talking about the one at the top, that really, to me, is all about purpose. It's about, as an employee, understanding that the work you're doing is contributing to something greater than just a paycheck for yourself and greater than just earnings for the company.
I'm going to jump in. There's a concept called the employee value proposition. Mm-hmm. Think of it as a fraction. The numerator is all the benefits from being part of this company. The denominator is your salary. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you want to have all these benefits and you want to be paid fairly for them. And purpose is a big part of the numerator. If I'm going to be doing all this work, I want to be serving a greater good. Mm-hmm. At Campbell, it's not perfect, but we were trying to nourish people's lives everywhere, every day. And everyone had a nourishing story about their Campbell soup growing up, going home for lunch, tomato soup, and a grilled cheese sandwich. Or when I wasn't feeling well, my mom would make me chicken noodle. Everybody had a nourishing story about Campbell soup. And we were trying to nourish all of our stakeholders. We were trying to nourish our investors. We were trying to nourish our planet. We were trying to nourish our employees. And we had programs across all stakeholder groups. And it brought the company together in a very, very special way. We published 2 documents on our portal. Now, I'm old, and the portal was somewhat antiquated. But we published 2 major reports. One was our annual report. The other one was our corporate social responsibility report, our CSR report. And when you looked at who opened what, nobody opened our annual report. They all knew that we had a good year. Everybody opened the corporate social responsibility report to see how we were building a better world. And guess what? And they all shared it. The parents who worked there would share it with their kids. The kids who worked at the millennial generation, they were sharing it with their parents. Here's this cool company we're working for. All this stuff was getting passed around everywhere. And it just was a blinding glimpse of the obvious to me that this is about more than a job.
Mm-hmm.
This is about having a life of service to myself, to my family, and to the world. And you can do both. And people hunger to do both. And it's up to the leaders to help create that kind of a platform in every organization, for profit, not for profit, or educational institution.
I love
Oh,
that.
I'm on my horse now. I'm sorry. You're really getting me juiced up here.
I love your horse. I'm riding right next to you.
Oh, good. It's good to have you with me.
I love the example of the CSR report and employees sharing it out. And I think that that is such a good example of something that I say often, which is purpose within a company is what changes a job from a job into a point of pride. It has this transformation of now I am proud of where I work and what we do and what we create in the world, instead of just I'm an accountant and I go into my office every day and I do my accounting thing and I go home. There's this other element that's really important that brings everyone together on the same page to make a difference.
I couldn't agree. If you went to my Conant Leadership website, you would see we had something at Campbell we called the success formula, which was about winning in the workplace, which was going to enable us to win in the marketplace, which was on a high order benefit going to enable us to win with our communities. And we were going to do all of that with integrity. Those were the 4 elements of the Campbell success model. And we saw it being self-reinforcing. The more we built engagement, the more we nourished our employees, the more we nourished our marketplace performance and our investors. And then the more we were able to nourish the world around us. Mm-hmm. And it became this flywheel effect, so that when in my annual report, I reported more than just our financials. I reported, here's how we're doing on employee engagement. It's working. Here's how we're doing against our CSR plan. It's working. Here's how we're doing in service to our investors. It's working. And we were able to create a system. We were able to talk about this system that was self-reinforcing, that where it was working on all elements. Not easy. I mean, make it sound easy. I can do that, but it is doable. And the more you get it going, Jim Collins uses a flywheel example a lot in his work, and I do too. The flywheel gets going, and you just need to keep feeding it because you've got momentum. Engagement just got better every year because it was good and getting better, and then performance got better, and then our ability to bring our CSR plan to life got better, and everything gathered, and our opportunity to engage women in the workforce got better. So you can develop this flywheel effect if you have to pay attention to all your stakeholders. It's not just about investors. It's not just about employees. It's about all the stakeholders in your enterprise. But it can be done.
Absolutely. So I want to shift gears a little bit and go to what you're working on now. So in 2011, the same year you left Campbell's, you started ConantLeadership, a mission-driven community of leaders and learners who are championing leadership that works in the 21st century. Can you share a bit about the work you're doing there?
Well, at Kona Leadership, we're trying to help leaders find their way in a way that works uniquely well for them. At the beginning of our conversation, we talked about how important it is for leaders to find their footing in a way that enables them to be more effective and more fulfilled in the middle of a very cockamamie life. We all lead a cockamamie life, right? Uh, one of my old mentors, Warren Bennis, an icon of leadership in the 20th century, Warren coined the phrase VUCA world, VUCA. He coined it in 1987. He said it's a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And he said that in 1987. And we all thought he was right. Today, we're a VUCA world on steroids. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Everybody's overwhelmed. Everything takes twice as long to do anything. And we're just trying to keep our heads above water. So leaders are overwhelmed by all this, yet they know they hunger to do better, and they know they need to do better. And so I have a perspective based on 45 years of work experience that says there's a way to navigate this, but it has to be pragmatic and aspirational at the same time. And so we developed this philosophy over the last decade that we brought to life in my new book, The Blueprint, where we want to help leaders find their footing in a way that speaks to them. And I actually founded the Kellogg Executive Leadership Institute at my alma mater, Northwestern, at Kellogg for 5 years. And I found I could do it more effectively if I did it myself. So that's what we're doing at Kona Leadership, trying to help leaders find their way. We do it. I teach it. I help these leaders almost one-on-one in small groups so that I can get my hands on them. And also we have a robust social media platform. We don't market it. That we're not trying to get followers. But we're talking to 400,000 people a day who are interested in being better leaders. Mm-hmm. And if they're not, we probably don't want to talk to them. But what we're finding is people care about this stuff, and they're looking for a place to go that's anchored in the experience of actually doing work, and who's willing to be a partner with them as they try and find their way. And so we've been doing it now for a decade. And we wrote a piece earlier this year celebrating our 10-year anniversary. And I had never been on social media as a CEO. I didn't know any of this stuff, not that I know a lot now. But I could remember how exciting it was when we had our first 10 followers. And it's like, wow, and maybe someday we can have as many people as we had at Campbell Soup Company when we had 25,000 people. Eventually that would be great. Never after the first 10 did we think we'd have 40,000 times that. So I delight in the engagement, and I get engaged in LinkedIn and Twitter conversations a little bit every day, trying to make sure that we're on message and that we're helping people. The other part of this Kona Leadership thing that's special to me is I don't get paid a penny for any of this. This is my paying it forward, all the blessings I've had. I charge for my boot camp just to help cover our cost, but I don't get a penny from it. And people are suspicious of CEOs in general, in terms of, what are you really up to? And I'm painfully altruistic here, and I derive great joy from that. I'm just trying to help. That's all I'm trying to do. That's what Conant Leadership does, trying to help leaders become better leaders.
I love that so much. Now, one thing I want to touch on, you're not only a celebrated executive, you're also a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author. You printed a new book, The Blueprint, 6 Practical Steps to Shift Your Leadership to New Heights, which you've mentioned a few times. And I'm curious, what do you hope most that people will take away from reading it?
Well, what we do is, and it's working. I'm loving it. First of all, we launched it on March 5th, 2 years ago, right into the teeth of the global pandemic. And we started canceling the launch. I launched it on Park Avenue in New York. on March 5th. On March 6th, we started canceling the launch. So it was not it was not a good time to launch a book. We still made the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, and we've had a great run. But this book is built to help leaders figure out. Earlier, we talked about it's hard to be a lead, to lead with conviction if you don't know what your convictions are. Mm-hmm. This book is designed to help leaders uncover what their convictions about leadership are and to bring them to life with the people with whom they live and work. And we found that you can boil this process down to spending a little time upstream, going from being reactive to being proactive, and being what we call more intentional with your leadership as opposed to just reacting. And a couple week commitment of working this territory, and you can get on a continuous improvement loop that will serve you for the rest of your leadership career. And we found a way to do this in a way that fits in this cockamamie life syndrome that we all have. Like, I don't have time for any of this. How am I supposed? You got to be kidding me. Well, take a little time here, a little time there. Do it with discipline. Create a little spaces that fit, that nest into your cockamamie life. And if they don't nest perfectly in your cockamamie life, they won't work. Don't do it. But I guarantee you can find these spots, and we help people do that with the book. And you can find your way, and you can get into a habit of raising your leadership profile in a way that works, and that works for you and works for the people with whom you're on the journey with. It's really cool stuff, and I delight in doing it. I'm working with people all the time who are on this journey now, and it's probably my favorite thing. Everybody that goes through this program creates their own personal leadership model just for them. And then we help them take that model. And by the way, I've seen no two that are the same. They study they look at their life and what matters most to them. They study the world of leadership and pull things from that, and then they create their own leadership model. And no two are alike, like no two leaders are alike. And then we help them connect that leadership model to the leadership expectations of the organization they're with. And they can find a way to be more of the leader they want to be and serve their enterprise better. And the key is to do it in small steps, develop small practices that are like compound interest. In the fullness of time, you can have a big impact. And so that's what this blueprint is all about. And it's very fulfilling work, because every leader, I was supposed to talk to a leader today whose computer was not working. And I go over their leader after they complete the course. We spend time talking about their leadership model, and they're excited because they now have conviction. They know what matters most to them, and they can lead with that conviction when they go forward. It's really cool stuff. And I don't know anybody else and nobody else that I know does it. So that's my story.
Well, thank you for putting out such an incredible book. And one thing I just wanted to mention, to the comment of everyone's living chaotic lives, especially leaders in charge of big organizations, and the question of, I don't have time to do this. And I think one of the things that stood out to me from this conversation is the way as a leader that you show up in your role can have such a profound ripple effect for the culture you're creating, where it changes the tone of the organization, and it's more fun, it's more engagement. You're still getting the work done, but you're excited to show up, and that's worth the time to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, you do have to sort of pull a Gandhi like this. You have to be the change you want to see in the world. And so it's important that the leader be the manifestation of this high energy, high engagement, high commitment culture. And leaders are reluctant. Some leaders are reluctant to do this because they're not on solid footing. But once you get on solid footing, you can lead with greater conviction, greater energy. And, this is going to sound trite, but it's true. The more you give in that way, the more you get back. The more you give, the more you get. And it's a lot more fun. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
why? I don't know why you would do it any other way. And I'm sorry. I've worked. I've had between my boss and my boss's boss, I've had 56 bosses in my career.
Wow.
I've had 28 bosses and they had
Mm-hmm.
bosses. So, and 3 were really good, really good. The other 53 were okay to not good. They're, and people tend to want to say, well, if my boss was only better, I'd be better. Bullshit. You can be better. You need to own this journey.
Mm.
I mean, you can't just pass it off as, I'm going to lead in a miserable way because my boss is a miserable leader. That's no good. You got to
Mm-hmm.
do better. We talk about leadership as being sacred ground. You have a profound influence on people. And you're just going to say, well, sorry, I can't do it because my boss isn't very good. Bullshit. I'm sorry, you can do better. And you need to do better for you as well as for the people that you're working for. And you can't just say, I'm a victim. I'm part of this sea of victims here. Woe is me. And do an Eeyore on me. Oh no, what am I gonna do? It's not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of any other leader that's had impact who has led with with an Eeyore tone. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. I mean, find me an example. It doesn't work. So you better damn well lead with energy and with conviction. And God, it's so much more fun. So if you send them to me, I'll straighten them out.
I love that accountability of
Yeah.
not passing the blame onto whoever you're
Oh
reporting
God,
into, but creating the
and they want to
atmosphere you want to
blame,
go into.
it's a terrible world,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got all these concerns. There's a pandemic, and there's all this racial inequity, and there is. I'm not denying. So what are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you come back to Stephen Covey's concept of what's your circle of control? Where do you have influence as a leader? And where you have influence is with the people with whom you live and work. So how are you going to show up in a way that makes that better? As opposed to says, yeah, I get it. It's a tough world. Nothing we can do about it. Bullshit. You can do something about it. You can.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm sorry. I'm going to hyperventilate here. So I'm going to have to sign off. I actually have another commitment, but anyway, you've certainly got my juices flowing now. So thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I wish you all the best going forward. Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you so much for the time. This was a great conversation.
All right.